So in this video, I want to talk about the difference between the epithelial cells versus connective tissue cells. So in the last video, we looked at the breakdown between epithelial cells and connective tissue cells. So let's just recap. Epithelial cells are in the first layer. So first layer, we have epithelial cells. Then we have connective tissue, okay? Connective tissue. So this, I'm just going to write this down. This is usually the epithelial. So if I am looking at let's say I'm looking at your hand, okay? So if I'm looking at my poorly drawn hand and I look at the skin, so when I'm looking at the outer surface, of the hand, the outside of the hand is, or the skin that you're looking at is your epithelial, is made up rather of your epithelial cells. So it becomes your epithelial tissue. So cell is like one cell. One unit is a cell, and when you combine a lot of cells together, then you get a tissue. Because the cell is really small, and then when you combine all the cells together, you get a tissue. So a lot of cells combined becomes a tissue. So the outer surface of your hand or the outer surface of your gums are known as epithelial tissue. Then underneath that, we have connective tissue. Okay, so then we have connective tissue, and then underneath that, we have, I know we have more stuff in between, but just for the sake of simplicity, underneath that we have bone. So let's look at this example over here. The outside cell, okay, is your epithelial cells, and this is what it looks like. There's lots of cells, and it's combined by a junction, which we'll look at in a bit. And then underneath the epithelial cells, we have connective tissue. Okay, so here's your connective tissue. So epithelial tissue, connective tissue. Now, one of the questions I want to ask you is, where do you see more cells? Do you see more cells in the epithelial layer, or do you see more cells in the connective tissue layer? And if you know what a cell looks like and usually has a nuclei, you would say that there's more cells in the epithelial layer compared to the connective tissue cells. So usually the epithelial cells, it's pretty dense in the sense that there's lots of cells, whereas in the connective tissue, the cells aren't there as much. Okay, so that's one thing. Epithelial cells have more cells, or epithelial tissues rather, have more cells rather. The next thing I want to point out is something called the extracellular matrix. So I'm just going to write this down because I know it's a mouthful. So extracellular matrix. And what the extracellular matrix is basically a gel-like substance. Okay, gel-like substance. And I'm going to show you this to you over here. So if you're looking at the connective tissue, the white that you see underneath or surrounding the cells and like the fibers, these are fibers and this is like blood supply. So the white stuff that you see over here is a gel, and that gel is called extracellular matrix. So that gel that we're looking at, the white stuff that we see over here, is known as extracellular matrix. In your epithelial cells, we also have extracellular matrix, and they're kind of hiding around or between the cells. Okay, so where do you see more extracellular matrix? Do you see more extracellular matrix in the epithelial tissue, or do you see more extracellular matrix in the connective tissue? If you said connective tissue, you would be correct, because there's a lot more fluid, a lot more gel-like fluid surrounding the cells and the blood supply and the fibers over here compared to in the epithelial tissue. Okay, so we see more extracellular matrix in the connective tissue. Okay, so one other thing that I want to talk about is something called the basal lamina. So this blue line over here that's separating the epithelial tissue from the connective tissue, that is known, I'm going to write it over here, as a basal lamina. And basal lamina is also sometimes known as a basement membrane. And really all it is, it's a layer that is separating the epithelial tissue from the connective tissue. Okay, so again, to recap, that blue line that's separating the epithelial tissue from the connective tissue, that is known as your basal lamina, also known as basement membrane.